All right, the next item on our agenda is we're very lucky to have a person who has helped us out, and if you want to see how he's helped you out, is now you're not going to have the congestion of having cars lined up trying to make left-hand turns on the First Avenue both ways. He was very instrumental in helping us getting that and turned around very, very quick. So what we're having here tonight is our state representative, Michael Zalewski. Michael, we'd like to have you come up, and he's going to give us a legislative update, and we're going to ask you some questions too. So we welcome and thank you very much for coming in tonight. Yes. Yes, so.
Well, thank you. I don't know if this mic is on.
It's on.
It's on.
You're on.
It's
on. Thank you for having me tonight, President Cindy and the superintendent. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Zalewski. I represent a large portion of Riverside and Brookfield in the Illinois General Assembly. I was elected in 2008. I'm an attorney by trade. I actually live in Riverside. Me and my family moved into town in 2010. We have 2 small children that will be in your care in about 13 or 14 years. So this is very important to me to make sure you guys are well taken care of. I'll go through the easy stuff and we'll work our way to the more difficult things. But I appreciate Kevin mentioning the stoplight. Just so everyone's aware, it was a cumulative effort by myself and other members of the General Assembly who represent the area, Steve Landick, Lisa Hernandez. So we were very happy to have that done, and I think it's a demonstration of how local government entities like yourselves can use us as a resource, especially on an issue like that where all it took was getting the principals in the room and convincing IDOT to do something that made sense that didn't cost a lot of money. So we were happy to help out, and again, I'm a resident, so I appreciate the use of it as much as the residents do. First things first, on the capital grant, Kevin has done a really nice job of keeping me in the loop. I've reached out to the governor's office. I believe the number is $8.5 million, and the high school falls into a category where the construction's been accomplished, and now you're waiting, in fact, to be paid back. I reached out to the governor's office, and I was told that it's not unreasonable for the board to expect the money in short order. I can't give you a timeline as to whether that's going to be 2 months, 6 months, or a year, but I asked those 3 timelines, and I was said somewhere in there. So I will stay on top of this along with Kevin and do my very best to get answers quickly turned around to the board and the superintendent. But I remain optimistic. I think the money's coming soon. I've been given no reason to believe it isn't coming soon. So knocking on wood and working with Kevin, I hope to produce a positive result for the board on that issue in the very near future. On the budget, that becomes a little more difficult. I just witnessed the conversation the board had a few seconds ago, and we're dealing with many of the same issues down in Springfield. I will tell you that the House passed a resolution right before we left for break that would allocate several $100 million to pay unpaid bills. The money will go directly to Controller Topinka, and she'll be able to pay people as soon as she can. The problem with that is by allocating money for the payment of old bills, it's going to take money away from GSA and foundation level money to the locals. So education, as much as the board and the high school took a haircut last year, we're going to be struggling to really struggle to hold you folks harmless this year. So the one silver lining in that is that I think of all the areas of leeway where the General Assembly has an ability to really push back and say we need to protect some things as education. And there's a push by several members of the General Assembly to figure out a way to develop some revenue. I can't tell you what those options are, but I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying it's the old reliables of a limited expansion of gaming to some sort of raising of the cigarette tax. None of those are appealing. None of those are politically popular. But I can go back now down to Springfield and say I sat through a difficult school board meeting where they're fighting the same fights we are, and we need to do our very best to help them out. So again, I'll work with Kevin and the various members of the school board to keep you abreast of that, but just know that we're well aware of the fight you guys are, the struggle you guys are having to maintain services, and we're doing our best to acknowledge that and help you. Pensions. I know that there's a fear out there, and it's been perpetuated that there's this massive change coming where the school boards are going to be, the pension costs are going to be downshifted to the school boards, and it could happen any day. What I'd like to do tonight is give you some reasons why these stories are coming out and what's the thought behind them, and maybe, I don't want to get into the prediction business, but give you some thinking on what I think may happen down the line. What's talked about frequently by Governor Quinn, Speaker Madigan, and President Cullerton is no one can explain why the state of Illinois is responsible for the employer contribution of teachers to the fund. And it seems like the easiest answer is that was done during the Great Depression when the states were the only ones that had the money. So now, in this era where there's very limited resources and we're not entirely sure how we're going to continue to make the pension payments at the rate we're making them, we're reevaluating everything, and one of the things that keeps coming up is why should the state be responsible for the employer contribution of the teacher pension payment? So that's why these stories are brought forth, and it's why local officials, I'm sure, are very jittery about what's coming down the pipe. What I will say is this: I don't think that it's reasonable to drop that kind of burden upon this local school board without the state doing something to acknowledge the fact that that would be such a heavy lift, and doing our part to stabilize the system before we do it. What does stabilizing the system mean? I mean, it's everything you've been reading, and I'm not here to say what will happen per se or what I'll do for sure. But, President Cullerton gave a speech at the City Club a couple of weeks ago, and I think he articulated the limited amount of options that we all know, including increasing contributions, making COLAs in line with CPI or the Social Security Index as opposed to a compounded rate, and dealing with some sort of sliding scale for retirement age. Again, I'm not trying to say that's exactly what's going to happen, but those are the types of things that are being discussed by Governor Quinn's working pension group that's scheduled to deliver a report to the General Assembly on April 17th. So I guess my message to the board tonight is please don't think that this is going to happen any day, that this is something that we're just going to be very aggressive and push forward with without taking into account the locals' reaction and ability to cope with it, especially under PTEL. But be aware that it's an idea that some of the principals acknowledge is something that's being discussed. So I appreciate, again, the opportunity to speak to the board. Opportunities like this help me because I get to listen to what concerns you folks, and I get to give you sort of an unfiltered glance at what we're doing in Springfield, because sometimes what we're doing gets lost in the translation from Springfield to Chicago, or in this case, Riverside and Brookfield. So I'm happy to take any questions, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you today.
Any questions for?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any updates on district consolidation efforts?
I haven't heard about any of those efforts recently. I know that there was a bill floating around last year that got people pretty, concerned, and they got a lot of phone calls in a way that energized people. But this particular year, I haven't heard a lot about school consolidation. I know Senate President Cullerton is constantly thinking of ways to consolidate local governments. But this year, for whatever reason, that focus has been more on the township form of government and local fire protection districts and things along that nature, as opposed to the school districts.
Right. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
And one of the bullets we received, it talked about that if the school district were to inherit the employee responsibility, it would be a 7.6% increase, which would be huge for us. When would we we couldn't be surprised with that kind of increase.
I don't disagree with you. What the general belief about pensions is we have this pension clause in our Constitution, and when other states, namely Arizona and Rhode Island, have unilaterally tried to impose pension changes without working with organized labor, the courts have struck them down, and that's not healthy, and it's not something that we would want to happen in Illinois. So the thinking is the way to accomplish pension reform is to have a offer and acceptance contractual agreement between the state and the organized labor, teachers and the state employees. So how do you do that? Well, you do it by a negotiation, and the question becomes, what does the state do as sort of an offer and consideration in exchange for the unions agreeing to do this? And one of the ideas being put out there as well, they say that the funds will be stabilized because the state will implement these changes, the funds will become stabilized, and then during the next negotiation of teacher contracts, which you guys just talked about a few minutes ago, that would be one of the negotiating points. Again, that's not to say that's exactly what's going to happen. There's no bill yet. There's no proposal by the governor's working group, but that's one of the components behind the idea that we should downshift the pension cost. I agree with you. It would be a shockingly hard burden for his local school board to absorb in a short amount of time, especially when you guys are dealing with other concerns. So I can tell you, I personally am cognizant of that, and I can express to my leadership the concern that you guys would express if we did something like that, and I'll take that back up the flagpole when I head back to Springfield.
What about the situation where, I think it was passed, where schools whose real estate base drops a certain percentage is not going to be able to levy for that next year?
That bill is in the Senate right now. I haven't looked at the bill status, President. I voted against the bill the first time. I voted for the bill the second time, and my feeling the second time was that I constantly get concerns expressed to me that my property values are going down, but my property taxes are going up, and I just cannot possibly understand that. And I wasn't under the impression that the first time it was a fair approach to handle the situation, but over the winter when I was continually hearing these concerns and continually hearing that, I just can't afford to pay my property taxes anymore, that I had a change of heart. I can tell you that I understand the concern expressed by locals on that particular issue. I don't know if the bill is going to move in the Senate, but the fact that it hasn't moved thus far is an indication that we'll take a wait-and-see approach. But I understand that was a difficult vote for me to take in relation to local school officials, and I acknowledge that. And all I can do is tell you why I did it and hope you understand.
Well, just as we had the discussion about revenue enhancement, that is a revenue enhancement for the district and other bodies to be able to use, so.
I understand.
Anybody else?
Yeah, the whole concept of what's being suggested just doesn't make sense to me. Years ago, there was a lot of talk about taking the burden off property taxes because people couldn't afford them, put them on the state. Now, the state's been collecting taxes from the same people who are going to have to pay the taxes if they shift the burden to the school district. And, presumably it'll be like the lotto. When the lotto came in, it was going to go add to the revenues, but what did the state do? They used a lot of money for the revenues and took the money they used to put into education and put it somewhere else. Yeah. So the same people are coming to you and saying, I can't afford this. A 7.5% increase in our cost is $1,350,000. And two things: if the state ever had to do it, they'd have to come up with a way to allow us to either fund it or allow us to immediately increase our revenues. The second thing is, inflation happens whether people's property values go up or don't go up. And even if you get, like some districts are doing, they're tying salary increases to inflation, I mean, I can't believe people think we should never give employees a raise again, because we won't have any teachers. So, you know, if 75 or 80% of our budget is salaries, even if they're tied to inflation, the rest is expenses, which may or not, like gas cost, the fact that the local taxing district here try to shift cost onto us. You know, we have a tax we have to pay to Brookfield now. All the taxing bodies are trying to figure out a way to shift their cost onto another taxing body. So it just is, you know, contrary to like thought. And people, part of the problem is people don't understand it. And I don't think people, you know, we're doing a good job as us, the state, the governor, to explain that it's not a panacea. That, you know, okay, your property taxes are going up even though your value is going down, but the bills still have to be paid.
Right.
And shifting is tremendous, and forget about the fact for the discussion, the problem's really here because the state spent the money instead of putting it into there.
Sure.
But even going forward, we can address that, but shifting a cost like that, you know, everybody's got to explain that to their constituents too. You still got to pay for that. And it's the same people who are paying, I mean, the state pays, their revenue is our taxes. So when they say we shouldn't have to pay for it, they're telling the same group of people, because if you're going to spread it along all the school district in the state, they're telling the same group of people, your taxes you give to us shouldn't pay it, your taxes you give to somebody else should pay it. It doesn't solve any problem.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up all points that I would have a hard time disagreeing with, especially on the fact that, you know, I walked into this job in 2008, and you know, it's been one bad round of news after another on you know, we don't have any money, and last year was the first time in the budget making process where the state, we took a step toward spending less money than we brought in, which is like unheard of in Springfield. I mean, it literally, I'm not even being facetious. It hadn't happened in 40 years down there. Just the assumption was always the programs will be paid for, and it'll get done. So I understand your point that, you know, for the state to say, well, we didn't make our pension payments and the pension payments were missed, and Blagojevich used the pensions as a credit card, and now we're paying the piper. Those are all valid considerations. But the flip side of that is that the tax increase that we passed in January of 2011, 15% of that GRF money this coming year will go to the pension payment, $7 billion. 10 years ago, it was 2%. On a pie graph, it would be the difference between a sliver and half the pie. And there's just no way to fundamentally deal with the state budget problems unless we somehow figure out what to do with the pension issue. And so, again, nothing I've expressed here tonight is set in stone, and it's nothing that I would say is coming down the pipe immediately. But it's my job to be honest with you, and I'm trying to give you an honest assessment that if we could somehow figure a way of easing the burden and making fundamental changes and stabilizing the funds, it might down the road systemically help everybody. Because if we spend less, if we have 15% GRF compared to maybe 5% GRF, then we're not talking about touching GSA and foundation level, and we're talking about getting you folks paid. I don't even know how much does the state of Illinois owe RB right now in unpaid bills. If you guys don't have that answer, I understand. I don't have my checkbook anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But I'm just saying that's money that I'm sure could come in handy if Topeka cut you a check tomorrow. I don't doubt that it wouldn't be.
Now, one other thing we need to talk about is, and it happens every third year, of the assessment on the triennial when it goes to Chicago. And the problem being is that taxes should have been paid to the taxing bodies and only affects Cook County in that September-October period. That's when it should happen. But we're winding up, especially when Chicago's in a triennial, of getting our tax revenue in November and December. As that is good when you're holding fund balances of 40 to 45% that carry over. But if you don't have that, then you have to take out a loan to cover you for the shortfall called the tax anticipation warrant. And
Matt,
I think
you talked to me about this 2 years ago.
I think we need to be able to start looking at that for, especially up in Cook County, where taxing bodies can go for short-term, very, 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 very low interest than they would pay for tax anticipation warrants, and being able to use the tax revenue to back that up. And once they got the tax revenue, which comes in right away, being able to pay that back.
I asked for language on that when we spoke, I believe it was in this room a few years ago, and the Department of Revenue came back and said that they didn't know how the money would be collected to keep that fund off to the side. But that being said, we've been working on legislation for 2 years now that would penalize folks for taking multiple homeowners exemptions that they're not entitled to. And I would be open to working with Barrios and the local school boards to say, hey, if we get that bill passed and there's penalty money assessed, let's use that for something like what President Cindy's talking about, and try to keep you guys away from those tax anticipation loans. I definitely look forward to revisiting that with you. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Mike, there was one question from a board member regarding, you want to talk on that, Mr. Welch?
First, thank you for the left turn lane. I'm sure every PACE bus driver who goes through that intersection and all the sports teams and school teams who are on the school bus that have to wait 15 lights to get through, thank you.
It was really exciting. The morning they did it, they actually do it at that box that's right outside, and literally is the flip of a switch. And when it went on, the signal went on, everybody let out a large cheer. So it was actually probably one of the finest moments I've had at this job.
You know, one of your statements struck me that getting the principals in the room is one way to get things done, and you also mentioned not a lot of money. You know, one of the things I'd like to just put out there for you, I'm not expecting any left turn lane in the next few months, but they told us that wasn't coming for 20 years, the last 20 years. But if you go out in the hallway on your way out, find your house on the map out there. It's a really nice map. It's kind of old. But if you look at it, this community is really, this high school district is really unique.
Mm-hmm.
We have the zoo property, the mall property, forest preserve property, and we make up 6 portions of 6 different towns, all of Riverside, all of North Riverside, about half of Brookfield, some of LaGrange Park, a subdivision of Broadview, and a sliver of Lyons. And there's a big population in North Riverside that can't get to school on a bike or walking.
Yeah.
And so as the next few months, as you're driving around First Avenue and driving in and out of Riverside, Brookfield, and North Riverside, I want you to notice that from here at the high school going north, there's no sidewalk for the regular folks to use, and there's no sidewalk for our kids to ride their bikes. Now that gas is coming down from almost $5 a gallon. But if you go south from here, we have a sidewalk going south from our high school into the next high school district, which, you know, doesn't help our kids
Sure.
get safely to school if they want to ride their bike. There is a sidewalk from 31st Street, it looks like, up to 26th Street. But there's, and that's on the east side of the First Avenue. But there's nothing for the kids to get from North Riverside on their bicycle, which many parents would like that to happen.
Yeah.
You look at it, and there's room along First Avenue,
Sure.
and it gets tight, it gets narrow, and you know, getting all the principals in the right room, I'm not even sure where your jurisdiction, it is
Yeah.
a state road, where the state property line ends, where the forest preserve property begins, where does the zoo property begin? But if you could just think in the back of your head, and if we come back to you and ask you to participate in some way, or if you're down in Springfield and you hear anything that can
Yeah.
help, you know, the future kids get to school on their bikes, which they really can't do from there, and the parents end up driving them mostly. And
Well, there's a master plan. The discussion that we had in January, or well, I don't even know when it was at this point, but the signal change is actually what IDOT would consider a short-term fix. The longer-term fix for that intersection is a lane addition, a right turn only lane addition onto Ridgewood, I believe, and some other things that widen the road and make it a little less congestion. So I think, and that would be included in IDOT's what they call their 5-year plan. So I think one thing we should visit is seeing if IDOT would be willing to price out that walkway in that plan and make it an add-on onto that plan. It doesn't seem to me that kind of provision would be too difficult to do if the engineering worked out correctly. So absolutely, I think that's a good idea, and I'll be happy to look into it for you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Well, you could also bring it up, especially since the state is not making it mandatory for school districts to provide buses. They could accommodate us with some safe pathways.
Sure.
Anything else for Mike? Okay.
Mike, I just want to thank you in front of the board. When I was down in Springfield in February and Senate Bill 2073, the one about taxing, putting the caps on the extension limits came out, I called Mike right away, and as I called all the board members to call Mike right away, and then I made it the point to get with Mike, and we talked, and we've been working together since the traffic signal, and now we're working together on the 8.9 million. And as a superintendent, similar to you, when you walked into a situation in 2008, I'm in a tough situation here, and I appreciate the relationship we've established and the help that you've provided us here. And if there's one thing I would ask that you take with you tonight is that all these students you see here tonight, they don't hang out at board meetings because it's cool.
It's not?
They're coming tonight because they're fighting for their junior, senior, or freshman years, because we're at a point here where we have to start looking at cutting opportunities that impact their lives. And that's why they're here tonight. So if you can just relay that message of these are the types of tough decisions that I'm being faced with and this board's being faced with, and it's not fair to them because they didn't make the decisions 20 years ago not to fund the pensions or to fund the pensions, if we can continue to work together, I think you and I can do some good things for this community.
Understood. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm gonna I have 2 little ones at home, so I'm not gonna be able to stay for the rest of the meeting. But you guys, Kevin has my cell phone number. He has my email. I'm always available, and I'm a phone call away, and I'm a short drive away. So anything I can do to be helpful, please let me know.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you very much.
very
Thank you for coming.
Okay, we're going to move to the next part of our agenda, visitors.
Before we move to the next part of our agenda, because we're in discussion, I would like, since you put on our table this walk-in on our attorney to the board, there was a walk-in item for a resolution, but according to attorney, we can't have a resolution, but we can have discussion and possibly put it on the next.
Yes, and then he said to put it on at the end when we talk about future items for consideration.
But it said we can have discussion on the particular item, so would that fall under discussion?
It's under action information following closed session and consideration of items for future meetings. That's what he said in his email.
No, I don't
Letter.
think it has to be at the end of the meeting. I would like it to be up front when there's other people to hear it. I don't think we have to acquiesce to have it the very last thing at midnight when we crawl out of here.
In reviewing the posted agenda for tonight's meeting, we do not see an item which appears germane to the proposed action item. Thus, in the light of the Rice case, the proposed item may only be discussed at tonight's meeting. It appears that the item at the end of the general agenda entitled Consideration of Items for Future Meeting would be the most appropriate place to discuss the item, which then could become a subject for actions at future meetings. Todd J. Faulkner, attorney. Said at that time period.
Well, he said it seems most appropriate, but he also says that a board member can bring anything up for discussion. And so while we're here and the community's here, we can bring it up, and it certainly will come up again. We have the Clarion, and
I'm just saying right now that our attorney said that we would be in violation of this.
Hold on a second.
No.
The attorney said if we voted on it, we'd be violating the law. We
Yes.
can discuss.
But it's not on the agenda.
Laura.
is it?
Why don't we, I talked to Kevin about it. Since I made the motion, I'm willing to acquiesce and put it at the end for tonight. If we'll discuss it at the next meeting in front of everybody if we don't resolve it today.
Well, I feel like you are bullying us to not talk in public.
I'm just telling you this is what our attorney said.
No, the attorney did not say that you can only discuss it at the very end of the meeting. He said it seems most appropriate to talk about it and then put it on next month's agenda.
What did Tim say? Tim is the one that brought up the email to discuss it.
But,
Can I hear Kevin's opinion on this, so you're a neutral observer?
No, I don't think we should put Kevin in the middle
no,
of it.
because it's our meeting. And
But we gotta follow the rules. I'm gonna follow the rules, and I wanna know Kevin's interpretation.
She's saying that there's no rule. You can move it to now.
Here
Yes.
is the
But is that
attorneys.
I had Todd
But is
submit,
it appropriate?
I had Todd submit the email so that you would have his recommendation in writing. He recommended items for future consideration. That's what the attorney recommended.
Laura's 100% right. And it's important people know that, because anybody else could bring an item up for discussion also, and it doesn't have to go at the end of the meeting when nobody's here,
That's right.
I'm
okay?
just saying this is what our attorney
We
said.
can't vote on it today. We can put it any place we want in the agenda, okay? Laura, if you...
Yes, I would like to bring it for discussion at, when Todd said it's appropriate to do it at the end of the meeting, he meant just putting it on the agenda for next meeting for a vote.
He said,
That's how I interpret it. But I would like to discuss how we as board members are being portrayed in the Clarion, how our voices,
it
and I
appears
want
that
to...
the item at the end of the agenda titled Consideration of Items for Future Meeting would be the most appropriate place to discuss the item, which then could be a subject of action at future meetings.
Could be a subject, that's where we would
Could
put
be a
on something.
subject of, for action at a future meeting. That's what it said.
But
That's his
it's-
last, and that's our attorney saying that.
He says seems most appropriate, but he does not say that that is the law. A board member, this is the part of the agenda, discussion items.
Well, we might be able to solve the thing easily, Matt. Are you willing to...
I'm just saying right now is.
Well,
I'm following my
everybody's here, are you
attorney's
willing
direction.
to tell people that you said something that wasn't approved
No,
by the whole
I'm
board?
saying right now is that we will follow what our attorney said. And you even said that you would acquiesce to that. So all of a sudden now it's just, you know, I have visitors here that want to talk. You know, I'm following what our attorney said. That's what our attorney said. I
But
pay an attorney to be able to give me legal advice.
you are bullying me as a board member, and you are bullying me to not express my concerns. And I am tired of being bullied. I am tired of being misrepresented by you.
Okay.
And I have that right as a board member to voice that. And I have the right to ask in public. If articles in this newspaper are vetted through an editor-in-chief, and how we as board members, and then at the end of this meeting, it will go on the agenda.
I'm just
For something that we
following
vote
what our
on.
attorney said. That's what I'm following right now, so.
So does anybody else at this table, any other board member, want to discuss how we are being portrayed in the school newspaper? How we are being spoken for in the school newspaper? Would anybody else like to discuss that?
I'd like to make a comment. You know, I think it's a judgment call. It's not a rule. It's a judgment call based on the fact that we have a number of visitors that want to make a statement here. So it's a value judgment that I know that President Cindy is making, and a lot of us probably share. I think you need to be heard. It sounds more like you want to make a statement rather on top of a discussion. If you wish to make a statement, I would like to hear it. Certainly would.
The other problem is, the only one that talks to the board attorney is Matt. And I've tried to call him when there was an issue and I had to wait a week till Matt approved it. So I agree with Laura. He was given a recommendation. It's not a rule, it's not a law. And again, Matt could
That's
solve
why
the problem now.
That's why we hire a lawyer.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the
to give
us
problem
value
is
advice.
something that you said, and you're the one who gets to talk to the attorney about when we can discuss it.
The request for you putting it on the agenda item was forwarded
Right.
by Kevin to Todd Faulkner. Am I right?
Yeah.
Again,
So Todd Faulkner came back and did this. Okay? So that's all I'm saying.
Laura, I'm willing to, put it out there to talk about it at the end. And if it doesn't get resolved in a way that we're comfortable
Next
with,
meeting.
it's going to be on the agenda at the next meeting.
but I think
So
while
that's
there's,
what our lawyer said.
I think while there's public here, well, there'll be a couple things then on the agenda about the attorney and access to the legal counsel for the whole board, because the attorney belongs to the whole board, not just you.
Okay.
But for the statement then, while the public is here, there were phrases in the newspaper that said, "The board said." And I want it to be clear while people are here that I, as a board member, certainly never voted for the items that were stated in this newspaper article. That's my statement. I don't know if anybody else here read it and feels that people are thinking that you made those statements that were said here. And if you're comfortable with that, then that's okay. But I know I never agreed to anything that was perpetuated in this newspaper article. And that concerns me, because it goes through the neighborhood, and people in the neighborhood read this, and they're alarmed. and it's unfair.
Planted the seed for further discussion.
Okay.
That's good.